So, who have we got here? On my right is Natalie Bashensky. Now, Natalie has been at 4BC on and off for many years. And in fact, February you left and went on a bit of a holiday with your partner, who's a science communicator,
He is, yeah.
I believe. And now she's gone a bit to the dark side. And so she's not actually with 4BC right now. She's with the Australian Medical Association of Queensland, where she's having to learn lots of jargon. So, but she's been involved in our workshops for many years, on and off, in our face-to-face and our online workshops. She describes herself as a journalist, writer, producer, performer, one-time government policy advisor, on hiatus podcaster, and occasional MC, and she's open for invitations. Next to her is Felicity Caldwell. She's a journalist with the Brisbane Times. She's been a journalist for 17 years.
Something like that.
Yeah, they don't look that old, do they? She's been a news editor of country newspapers, but she's currently with the Brisbane Times and has been with them since 2016. She's done a variety of rounds, from council, state, federal politics, transport, court, education, and data journalism, which sounds interesting.
Only self-taught though, but I love Excel.
And she's covered lots of elections, budget lockups, and the Royal Banking Commission. I'll ask them all about their science experience shortly. And then on my far right is Laura Dimmick. She's a TV reporter with Channel 7. She's a reporter, newsreader, and weather forecaster. Not forecaster, presenter.
Presenter.
Yeah.
Not a meteorologist yet.
Not a meteorologist. And she's been with Channel 7 for 17 years as well, wasn't it?
Yeah, I've been a journalist for about 20 years.
But, for 20 years.
7 years, 17 years.
Yeah, and she's covered all sorts of things, but it's mostly been with TV, hasn't it?
Yeah,
or your
primarily,
career. Yeah. She said she's covered cyclones, floods, high-profile court cases. She met a BG. But one of her highlights was being told by former Prime Minister Julia Gillard she had an impressive ability to run in high heels. And she's also been involved in many of our training workshops over the years. So welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having me. And I assume everyone.
So I wanted to ask you, what science qualifications do you have? Or what qualifications do you have?
My biology was actually my best subject in high school, even though I thought music would be my best subject.
But biology was your best subject? Yeah. What about you, Natalie?
You know, I thought I should probably study science in the later years of high school, but I had drama and history to do, and English. Like it's a lot, so I didn't. However, I have a healthy interest in sciences, but yes, I have zero qualifications.
Laura?
Yes, also zero. An interest too. I have an interest in it, but most of the stories we write, we have no knowledge of. So working for the AMA, you don't have to have a medical qualification.
Thank God.
Our job is to take other people's expertise and explain it and simplify it. So our expertise is in words and language, I suppose.
One of my best things that was told to me in my journalism degree was that journalists know a little about everything and nothing about anything.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I think that's one of the key differences between scientists and journalists. Scientists have this very deep knowledge in one area. Journalists have a very thin knowledge across a whole range of areas. And I think that difference is something to remember. So, what science stories have you done in your career of 15 plus as being journalists? Have you done any science stories?
I have. I've done a lot, and some of them through connections through you, Jenny, too. Varied ones. Health and research is obviously a big one, and that's part of the life that we live, I suppose, at the moment with an ageing population. There's always an interest in medical breakthroughs and research around health and wellness. So they certainly are ones that feature a lot. And I also have a personal interest in the environment. And so I really like doing stories that relate to environment and plants and animals and how our natural environment is going. But I haven't done any for a while, so I was thinking about that before this panel. I thought I actually need to put some feelers out and get a good one.
Since you say health, that was one of the things I was thinking about as well in terms of the science stories that I've covered. They're mostly related to health. I've done a fair bit of work with Health and Wellbeing Queensland recently in terms of nutrition in children and sort of working those into personal stories and writing a bit of myself in there as well. There was some research about some teenagers who took pictures of their food every day and what that looked like for regional kids who were taking pictures of cows and vegetables versus some kids in the city were taking pictures of like chips in the supermarket. And I thought no one would read this story actually, but the headline I put on it was kids took pictures of their food. And this is what it was, and everyone's apparently. But a lot of being online, you have to really get people if they're coming off the homepage with a headline and a picture. So it's really about. We definitely do not do clickbait. That's one of the things we don't do at Brisbane Times. But it's about putting a headline there and a picture that makes someone want to read your story.
So, Felicity, you work for Brisbane Times, which is an online newspaper, but you're also connected to the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age and Channel 9 these days with Fairfax Media. So do your stories travel as well?
Sometimes if there's a national appeal, they might run in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, and we're trying to collaborate a little bit more with 9TV as well.
Okay. What about you, Natalie? Have you done science stories on radio news and
Yeah, I
radio
would say
programs?
that and I worked at Brisbane Times as well for a while, but I was more in the arts round there, so I didn't do as many science stories. A couple would come across my desk occasionally, but in radio, I would say that there's a huge ability to get science and research stories into radio news bulletins. Typically, I mean, everything could change in a heartbeat. The ABC is obviously something that's always going to be there. Your commercial radio stations, commercial talkback, they have different pressures on them. They're owned by Nine as well. And there's always the question of ratings and always the question of how much resources you can put in a newsroom and all those things. But that aside, if a news bulletin is about 4 minutes, 4.5 minutes, 5 minutes, then you're going to stack the bulletin up the top with what's happening right now, crashes, accidents, incidents, big court case, big political story. But you've still got it then at the end, we do a minute of sport because that's our country. But then in the middle is where you have your more human interest stories. You're more rounding out the bulletin with a medical breakthrough, a health story, interesting health data, a call from a university for more funding, a call, so that's where the playground is for science communicators to get into those bulletins. So you're not necessarily going to have, it absolutely can be. There's such a thing as a slow news day. So I have definitely on a day where there haven't been, murders, deaths, fires, crashes, floods, cyclones. There's definitely been days when I've led with science stories. But on a general rule would be you're going to be maybe second, third, fourth story in. But that's not a bad place to be because people are listening in, they've tuned into the news, and then you've got a chance to get your story across. Now, having said that, you're maybe going to get 30 seconds to a minute in that story. So less time, less detail than, say, a TV news report or certainly an online or a print article can do.
I actually thought while you were speaking about those little tidbits of research and stuff, I actually wrote a science story today for for our blog, which is something I wanted to mention. We run a daily blog, and it's only about 3 lines. But if you're looking for, it's so hungry, you've got to keep feeding it with little things, a bit like radio, I suppose. You just got a bulletin that comes up.
Yeah, so I wrote a BT blog when I was there. It's sort of the kind of thing that comes and goes occasionally, but I would take charge of that often, and you'd be like, oh, interesting research out of
interesting research. I need something. Yeah, there was one from UQ today, and it was vitamin D deficiency in pregnancy can lead to
and they often
autism.
have good pictures or interesting sciencey pictures that you can then throw in your online. So the opportunities are out there.
So how important is it to get science in the media, do you think? And let me throw a point. We've just had a federal election. A couple of issues in that federal election were nuclear power and climate change. Science is embedded in both of those. So how important is it to get science on in the media?
I think it's really important, and you want the experts talking about the science and not necessarily the politicians paraphrasing what the science is. So it's about getting trusted voices that don't come from a lobby group, but an independent researcher who's willing to stand up there and talk about it.
Yeah. they're fighting for resources, whether it's government funding or private investment. And so the more people know about it, the more they understand, the more likely they're going to support causes like government funding for organisations that are doing research, or attracting money from the private sector, from businesses, and from simply donations. I mean, I can actually think that a lot of the science stories I've done have been looking for investment, researchers, including a really, really interesting one that I did about heartworms and how they think they can use them to fight cancer. They just didn't have the money to continue the research. So the story was, we need a private backer or someone to give us money for this. So if you're not putting science at the forefront of people's minds, and they're not clicking on it and seeing it and hearing about it, people don't know it's happening, and they don't know what's happening in their own country, and the breakthroughs and the milestones and the research and the people and the money that's needed to keep those breakthroughs and those exciting developments happening.
One thing I've noticed over the last 30 years has been the demise of science journalism. I can't think of a science journalist who's not in the ABC in Queensland or anywhere else much in the country.
Brisbane Times had a great one, and then he up and died on us.
We did.
Sorry, I said
Yeah.
that. I said that jokingly. My best friend worked for
Natalie's a very good friend.
Yeah. My best friend worked for Brisbane Times, and he was a dedicated health and science reporter. Loved a dinosaur.
I did love a dinosaur.
Loved a dinosaur. And, I think science really benefited from him having the ability to go deep on stuff and building those relationships, as you said. So they still exist, but they are fewer.
They're very rare species. And so one of the things I want to impress upon everyone tonight is mostly you or your researchers will be dealing with people like this, who are people who have got general knowledge about things, but not deep knowledge about science. And from that perspective, there are things that you can do that can help you in supporting researchers and scientists in their communication. But I wanted to come back to stories and where you get your ideas from. As science journalists are always scanning scientific journals, scientific media to find story ideas. But you get lots and lots of story ideas every day into the newsroom at Channel 7, at Brisbane Times, and previously at 4BC. I mean, how many different story ideas do you get a day, and how do you choose the ones that you choose?
We get a lot, dozens and dozens. And there's obviously lots of competing interests in that. And it will depend on the medium too. Like you're mentioning, radio is a really good one for science stories, and it is. TV can sometimes be difficult because a lot of these things, we need illustrations, obviously. We need graphics or vision opportunities. So a lot of great science stories don't make great TV stories. And sometimes, on the flip side, they actually make better TV stories if they are a very picture-friendly kind of thing. So that there have been times where it's been a really interesting story, and sadly we haven't covered it at 7 News because we didn't have enough good quality pictures that worked for that story. So that's a big factor. And then there are people in our office who spend most of the day deciding what stories we will and won't cover based on resources and based on lots of other factors and interest, hoping they get it right.
I presume you get most of these story ideas on email.
A lot, yeah. The majority, I would say.
So how much attention would you give each story before you just press delete?
Good question. You could dismiss something very quickly. That probably might have legs, but yeah.
I don't know about you guys, but certainly in my experience in newsrooms, newsroom inboxes often just are weirdly signed up to all sorts of newsletters and a lot of news outlets and wire services, and you just get random stuff like the sale of a stock in Kuala Lumpur, and you're like, I don't know why I got this, delete. So obviously there's some very obvious ones that you delete, because when you're in a particular medium, you tend to be looking for who your audience is. So if it was, say, an Australian company that's made good in a Brisbane company that's made good in Kuala Lumpur, okay, that's more interesting. So yeah, there's a lot that you can kind of just sort out quickly. And then it's a case of, certainly from the radio side, but I would say, can you get the talent, which is you guys? So can you get someone to speak on this. So in radio, you do what's just called written stories, copy covers, or writes, different names for them, but where it's literally just the newsreader reading some lines. But ultimately, what we want in a story that's about science, research, medicine, health, all of those things, we want an expert to be able to explain what's going on, what's been discovered, what the progress is, what the new thing is. It also gives then a break from the newsreader's voice. It gives texture and interest to a bulletin, keeps people engaged. So if someone is available, then great, we might be able to look into that. And then you're also looking at audience. So say working at 4BC, the audience tends to be a bit older, so that's why health stories are always really, really of interest to people. Anything that's about health funding or scientific breakthroughs, as Laura was saying earlier, about aging population, those kinds of things. So if you can get, if you're like, hey, that's right up our wheelhouse. Solution for back pain, research into why your kids are ungrateful, all those things, then, let's get someone on the phone and we can get that into our bulletins.
So I noticed that focus on your audience. So I might get the rest of you to talk also about the audience that you're thinking of when you're selecting stories.
Our audience is pretty broad. It doesn't necessarily skew older or younger. I think it's maybe slightly more male than female. We try to have a pretty general appeal. For a story to go well in Brisbane Times, you really want a case study though. Someone who's willing to be in a photo. So not the researcher, someone who's been affected by it. I think it'd be a similar thing on TV.
Yes.
And you want a really good headline, you want a personal story, and then to go on it. But I really think if I wouldn't click on this story, then why would anyone else? If I'm writing it and I'm thinking, I wouldn't even read this story, why would anyone else read it? So you just got to think of something that you'd see and you go, I need to know more about this. Or
if you've ever been at a barbecue or a dinner party, I don't know what people do to socialize anymore, but if you've ever been out and then you go, I saw this thing, I saw this thing about they're doing this now with robots, or this can be done with AI, like that's evidence that you've taken something in and that you're clicking and you're passing on that info. So essentially, if you find yourself talking about this really interesting researcher, then you've probably got something that the media would be interested in.
Sorry,
Laura, any thoughts for you?
Yes, who is our audience? We spend a lot of time thinking about that. I would say TV media probably does skew to an older audience, but we very much now put a lot of our stories and a lot of our presence on social media as well. So we're trying to capture that younger audience who probably aren't turning on free-to-air TV and have no idea what it even is.
You can hear, you can hear just the cumulative tiredness of all media in Laura's voice. They're trying, how do we get people to look at this stuff?
Yes.
It's such
funny,
a challenge.
It's funny, Laura, because I remember in our very first media skills workshop, we asked people to put up their hands if they'd never watched a TV news story, and nobody put up their hand. These days, I don't ask that question because most young people, younger than me, have never watched TV news.
But it's not just like, I figured out a couple of months ago that my antenna to my TV was broken and that I can't get free-to-air TV. I went to flick on the news or something because something was on. I'll watch it on the news. I can't get free. What's happened? Oh, my antenna's broken. I still have not fixed it. So I don't even have the ability to flick on, because that's just how life has changed. And I'm like, I'll see it on socials.
social media.
We've got an
So-
app. We've got an app for that.
Yeah,
It's okay.
So the
Lots
stories
of
aren't
people
just about
watch
the
it on the
free-to-air or the printed newspaper
No.
or the online newspaper even. It's also
The
about
world
the
around.
blogs and the social media that connect with it.
Social media is a big thing of what we do now as well, and filming little reels. And often if we can't go out there to physically interview someone, we've been asking lately, can they film themselves? We send you a question, can you film yourself with a vertical video just answering this question? And then we'll kind of splice it in with something else. So
You don't do that, Laura. You don't get them to
No.
film themselves yet, do you?
we're a
there's-
small team.
Yeah, different people do that. It won't be long. Debbie.
But they're still interviewing on Zoom. Like we had our president on Zoom just last week.
Yeah, Zoom has changed our life.
Yeah.
Certainly made it a lot easier to get places. I would say science stories and research and breakthroughs actually really good stories for social media. I think anyone who scrolled on Instagram or something would probably get a heap of them, and there's certainly ones that do very well for us in terms of people clicking and engaging in those kinds of stories. So there's certainly a place for science stories in that space. And I would say, even though a lot of people don't turn to traditional media to get information, at a time when AI is exploding and Facebook has, changed the way that they engage with media too, it's actually harder to get trustworthy information. And that's never been more important too. So there is a real argument to say that if they're clicking on our stories and they know the 7 News brand, they know, other media outlets who are trustworthy and do fact check and have a bit of authority in that space, they are really interested in learning what that story has to say. And that's a good place to take your story and get an audience for it where you can be trusted.
So I wanted to go to your daily life and just find out how many stories you would do as a radio journalist, news journalist, as a journalist on the Brisbane Times, and as a TV journalist on Channel 7. So starting with you, Natalie, I know that you remember, how many stories of any type would you do in a shift, in a typical shift?
So if you're working with other people, it might be fewer. But if you're working by yourself on, say, a weekend breakfast shift, which is what I did most recently, kill me. But you're working from 4 a.m. to midday, so an 8-hour stretch. It's just you. There are no breaks. You are just producing a bulletin every either half hour or an hour. So it could be upwards of like 50 stories. Now that could include grabbing stories from our networks, other networks, and getting them into our system and maybe localizing them or editing them if they write terribly. And it could be totally original content. It could be stories that other staff have left for you that you personalize to yourself or, do some rejigging. But yeah, in terms of original content that I would write based on interviews I do or releases I get or police stuff or things I managed to record off the TV, someone's on Channel 9 because 4BC is owned by Channel 9. So we would use Channel 9. If they're not on 9, they're on 7. I would use 7 and then credit them. And if it's someone who's appeared on a blog or a video's been put up on BT, I could record that and say they've appeared on, this website. Like 20, 30, 40 different pieces of
In a shift.
content. Now, they're all small pieces, right? These are not big, long, in-depth articles. These are anything from 30 seconds to a minute of spoken content. But yeah, there's lots.
So let's pretend it's like 5 minutes to the hour. There's this fast-breaking science story. How soon could you interview someone and put a piece on the 7 o'clock news?
A fast-breaking science story. So you're talking about like the manner of, like, say, pandemic. I was not a journo during COVID, so I'm sure there are lots of lessons there. But in terms of sort of like, if it was something like that, like COVID things, then you would try to, again, it depends if you're working by yourself.
How quick could you get it on air?
Look, I'm good at what I do. So I could get something 5 minutes before and get it into the news. It would require a little bit of winging it.
I know you could. That's why I asked you.
Working with someone, God, that sounds like I'm so up myself. But like just years of experience, guys.
You have to be very fast in your job getting stuff out. Like,
Yeah.
In radio.
Yeah.
You have to be. You have to have a turnaround.
Yeah.
So it's it's like sending tweets kind of thing.
So you might like interview an epidemiologist about the
if you had 5 minutes,
the pandemic. You got a 15-second grab. You would write 2 sentences in, and it'd be on the news.
Yeah, I just turn it around, throw it in, and then figure out how everything else works out as I go.
Yeah,
and try to do that while sounding like, and now in breaking news.
So from breaking,
the pandemic has claimed 74 lives this morning. I don't know.
So from that to more in-depth on the Brisbane Times.
Yeah, so when I was in regional newspapers, I used to write about 3 or 4 leads a day and 3 or 4 briefs a day. But at Brisbane Times, I work 3 days a week, and I probably write somewhere between 2 to 3 leads a week.
What's a lead?
Sometimes one. So somewhere between. The limit is 500 words, but if you push it, you can get 800 if it's like quite an in-depth story.
It's a big story.
Lots of case studies, lots of different interviews, lots of different photos, some graphs, that kind of stuff. You could maybe get 800. So I'd probably write somewhere between 1 to 3 stories a week at the moment. And then I run the blog between 7 and 9:30 Tuesday and Thursday mornings. So then I manage some other people, write me some blog posts, and I'll write some blog posts. So they're only about 3 or 4 sentences long.
So
So
you're
I'll probably
on,
maybe write 3 of those a day.
so it's still fairly fast paced, particularly for those longer stories where you have to get a number of interviews.
Yeah. There's sort of a bit of pressure that you want to know that the story is going to stack up by the time you have your 9:30 news conference in the morning. So you make a few calls and
Felicity, is what you write, does it get printed exactly as you've written it?
Sometimes.
Now, if I was to ask that in the olden days, no,
Not
it probably
always.
wouldn't, because
Not
it would
always.
go through 4 or 5 people who would change it.
Mm.
So I really think the media is changing somewhat.
It goes through at least 2 sets of eyes before it gets on there.
Okay,
So
okay. So there is still that guide, whereas you don't have anyone stopping you from saying.
I believe at the ABC they still have some form of in a smaller newsroom. You will try to say, "Hey, I've done this. Can you have a quick look over it to someone to see if it sort of flows, makes sense, any glaring errors?" But often when you're talking about specialized science content, it's the blind leading the blind. Like if I've made a mistake about the relative humidity of a disintegrating beetle, it's not like they're going to know and correct me. But it's more about if something feels wrong or so it's really up to me to try and get it as best as I can, which is why I will ask in an interview setting the most stupid basic questions, which you might feel like I'm insulting your intelligence, but no, I'm just insulting my own. I just really want to know if I've got this correct.
I do remember a journalist at the Canberra Times saying that she'd written a story. She was a science journalist. She'd written a story and it went to the sub-editor, and the sub-editor looked at the photo and it said, that guy doesn't look old enough to be a professor. So he changed professor throughout the whole story to Mr. Not even doctor. Anyway, Laura.
Well, maybe young people should stop being so overqualified.
Laura, you've got it pretty easy on TV, don't you? You only do what, 1 story a day?
1 story a day, but it's a great story.
So why do you only do 1 story? Tell us why.
It takes all day, and that's not even counting the coffee breaks, because we have to drive to the place and we have to film the person, do the interview, and then we have to get another interview and possibly a 3rd one, possibly a 4th one, and then you have to film your bit and then you have to write it and then it has to be edited, and usually it makes it by about this much every night because it has to be handed in at 6 o'clock and there is no leeway with that. If it misses its spot, you don't want to know what happens.
I think all media stories, regardless of the format, have 3 elements to them. They have the talent, which is the person being interviewed or the people being interviewed. It has pictures, and it has the story that puts it all together. So moving to, first of all, to talent, the people that are being interviewed. Researchers, scientists, are they easy to interview? What sort of tips can you give these people about what they should tell their researchers or scientists, or if they're researchers themselves, about being good talent because what you're after is a little grab, what you're after are some quotes to put in your story, you're after a grab for television. That grab, I believe, can vary between about 2 seconds and 7.4 seconds. So
they're hard. They're really, really hard to interview, I find. It's like talking to doctors is difficult. Talking to scientists is difficult because their knowledge is incredible and they don't speak in necessarily common everyday language the way we would speak in the jobs that we do. And it is often filled with terminology and jargon and words that we would not use every day. So I think that's probably the hardest part. And the science is usually complicated, and trying to simplify it is tough. And that is our job, but it also has to be the person's job who's being interviewed to try and get their message across in a simple, clear way. I have an example of we interview police obviously a lot, and one of my big pet peeves is police will say the offender decamped, and you think,
there is decamping.
No one speaks like that. Like, he ran away, he left. It's a perfect example of that's jargon that they use when they're talking in their police language, and words that you'd never go, Mum, you'll never believe what happened today. After we met, he decamped. It's just so odd. And I think science interviews can often be filled with language like that doesn't have meaning to
I think
people every
decamped
day.
in a southerly direction means that they jumped off the building. But yeah. So keep it simple.
Yes.
Okay, any other thoughts from you two about
I-
what makes for good talent?
Yeah, basically someone who can explain it in a layperson's language, and then someone who'll be very patient with me. You're talking about stupid questions, and they always say there are no stupid
Yeah.
questions. And if I've had an interview and they go through all these different facts, and if it's a really technical subject, I'll probably want to go back with you and check all of those numbers and all of those names of things and make sure they all make sense. And like the story, I've written the story. It's not like they're going to write the story, but I do want to check that all the facts are right.
Okay, we'll come to this checking thing in a minute. So you want them to be patient with you and that not to see you as asking silly questions.
Yes. And yeah, I'm not trying to be rude by asking you the same thing again,
And
but
it's
just
not
want to
that
make
I
sure I get it
haven't-
right.
It's not that I haven't done my research.
Yes, yeah.
In the case of when you're writing a more in-depth article. In my case, as a radio journalist ringing you up, I'm like, look, I've had a glance at the media release. Let's go. So yeah, I haven't done a whole lot of deep diving and research. So I'm kind of counting on you to help me understand as we chat through it. But I would say, just to add to those things, which are, number one, number two, I would add probably passion, enthusiasm, being
Yeah, that's a
keen
good one.
about what you're discovering.
Scientists and passion?
No, but there must be a reason why you get into the fields to look at the things you do. There must be a reason why
It's
you're
not
spending
the money, I don't think.
or the security of funding or whatever. There's got to be a reason why you're so dedicated to solving one particular very niche issue. So show us that, show us why it matters and why it's important, and just explain and go, oh, this thing, if we can just do this, will allow this to happen. And then we're like, if you've got a good news story, and people always say that they don't want to watch the news because it's all negative. It's like, yeah, well, the news is often things that are bad. Like if we said, well, it was a good day today, we didn't have a cyclone, you'd be like, why am I watching this? This is boring. So it's like, yeah, we're going to tell you about the bad things that happen. But actually people like a good news story, and they like, here's a breakthrough. Here's something that might help people. Here's something that might make a difference to your life or the life of someone you know and love. And when you see scientists being passionate about it, you're like, gee, I'm glad there are smart people out there working on these things, because I'm at home just flicking on maths again, and I'm not doing anything to help society.
I think speaking of good news stories as well, I feel like
I don't watch maths, by the way. That was the first thing that came to my mind.
I had to think what that was. But,
I'm just trying to get some brownie points back.
I did watch Gruen last night and they talked about maths, so I now know what maths is. Married at first sight, in case you didn't know.
Speaking of good news stories, I feel like science journalism is something that can be used for solutions journalism, so news that you can use. So rather than just saying climate change is really bad and we're all going to die, like it's or like
It's
or
too
like
big of a
there's
thing to
too
do.
much of this and the disease is really bad kind of thing. Like just instead of telling you that news, you're giving someone who's reading it what they can do, and that's not about just like dumbing it down like you should recycle, but it's like kind of like explaining it in a way that people can understand that, and then they can talk to their friend at the barbecue about it, like, hey, do you know this? And it's like a topical issue, but it's in a positive way that they feel like they're doing something about it.
I hate that phrase, dumbing down. I think if you dumb down the science, then it's likely to be inaccurate or distorted in some way. For me, it's about distilling the science in a way that you are challenging people with your ideas and not your language. And that's what I think our journalists said. They talked about simplicity, they talked about passion, they talked about patience, and they talked about looking at what's relevant to their audiences when you're trying to be interviewed for a story about science. I wanted to turn to pictures. Now, Natalie, why have I said pictures for radio?
Theatre of the mind, I'm assuming. Theatre of the mind. If you're listening to me online with your Zoom turned off, this is Theatre of the mind.
And I think the best radio talent speaks in pictures.
Yeah, you've got to be able to draw something in the mind of people who are maybe driving their car, preparing dinner, looking after kids, they've got the radio on. The better you can paint that picture verbally as to, you know, you got a weird science story. It's like, imagine an arrow being fired. What we're doing is firing this proton at this thing, and it's, you know, and so all of a sudden people can picture, oh, okay, there's an arrow involved in something. So, you know, I'm making a random example there, but again, by rather than say we we decamped the protein, and you know,
in a strategic direction.
You know, we treated this as a slingshot, and we flung a thing at this. You know, all of a sudden people can kind of go, oh, they're doing, you know. There was a great story some years back about scientists putting little backpacks on bees, which was actually what they did, like put backpacks on to study bee populations or something. I forget the details, but, you know, just that image alone, and that's what they did, so they were very lucky in that case, but just that image alone is something that really translates well to radio, because all of a sudden you can picture a little bee and look at my cool backpack. Not everyone is going to have the ability to have something quite dropped in their lap as much as that, but if you can find a way to kind of paint that picture verbally, then that will do sort of a lot of the heavy lifting for you.
I think your thing about metaphors and analogies, that also makes for good talent. And I remember there was a curator in Victoria Museum, and there was a giant squid that had washed up on the beach. And it was actually TV, but it would work for radio too. And the journalist asked him, you didn't hear the question, but she must have asked him, how big is this squid? And instead of giving us exact dimensions, he said it was so big we had to borrow a ute to drive it around in, and it hung off both edges of the ute. It had calamari rings the size of truck tires. That is really good talent, because it's painting that picture. Pictures for a Brisbane Time, I imagine you've got lots of pictures that you put online and in your stories.
You really need a picture. You can have a great story, but if you don't have a picture, a case study, a smiling face, someone it might affect, then I don't know, it doesn't really work as a lead story.
So what makes for a good picture for an online newspaper? And then I'll also ask you about graphics and diagrams.
Someone's face in it rather than a generic picture is really good. But phones are so amazing these days that you don't really need, it's great, and I love professional photographers, and they do a much better job than me. But with a phone, you can take photos that you can use online these days. So, and social media as well, if we can get videos, it's always good.
I presume you just don't want people sitting in a row like us.
No, not this. This would be a terrible news photo. Yeah.
So how could we make this a better news photo?
So if we were discussing a particular bit of science research, we'd want to go to the scene. If it was about sunflowers, I'd want to get someone in a sea of sunflowers, for example.
Yeah, okay. What about TV? TV is all pictures. You've already told us, Laura, that if you don't have good pictures, you don't have a story.
Yeah, pictures are pretty important to us. It is obviously a visual medium, and sometimes that can make it hard if you're talking about, you know, sending electrodes through the brain or whatever the research might be. But there's ways around it. We have very good graphics departments. Sometimes there's simulations. Sometimes there's video of people getting the brain scans. So we don't have to be incredibly literal when we're talking about we need to be able to see these particular things in action. There's lots of ways to illustrate a story, and if you watch a news story, you'll see that there are times when we use file footage and we use mock-ups and that kind of thing. Researchers in their labs, QIMR has a lab that is purely dedicated to filming TV and photos and things and content in it. I don't think you can do research in it, but it's purely for media purposes and things like that, which is super helpful.
How Wizard of Oz. Pay no attention to the man behind it.
There's no like bacteria or anything terrifying in there. It's just a whole bunch of like journalist pens usually that have been left. But it's really helpful if you're looking for pictures. You can say they're doing research, and we don't have to be doing the actual research at that moment, but it is a way to illustrate a story.
I remember one of the best stories that I did for a client. It was about that one of their researchers had discovered that the bacteria that breaks down wastewater is different to the one they thought it was. And I got TV coverage on that. The reason I got TV coverage was that at UQ, where the research was done, I set up little stations with the scientists that said they had like a little mini sewage treatment plant. They had fluorescing bacteria under another thing. They had all these things set. We had three or four different stations set up in the lab, and the TV journalist said that was one of the easiest stories I ever had to catch, and it made it to all the TV stations about this new bacteria that we wrote the science textbooks. Anyway,
I'd imagine
so
that one that I like in TV is when a breakthrough or some research happens that like kind of mirrors a TV show or a movie. So you can kind of use footage from the TV show
Yeah.
to illustrate. You're like, this is a real life Black Mirror. Or something.
Oh, no.
So once you've got the quotes and you've got the pictures, you write your story. How important are media releases? Or where do you get the information to write your stories? And then do you send it back, particularly to scientists, so they can check it and rewrite it if need be?
Do you send a story back to a
Yeah.
scientist? Soz.
No.
We talked about the
No,
checking in while we're
no,
doing it.
I started like touching on it and then I stopped. But no, we don't send stories back for checking to anyone. But we will, if asked, send quotes back, or if it's a very technical story with lots of numbers and facts, I do like to, if I'm unsure, check that with someone. But that's
So
not,
how will you check
but-
that, Felicity?
probably give them a call, or if
And you'll
they've
read it back to them and make
yep,
sure.
read it back to them, or if they've, it's very rare actually that someone will say, can you send me your story? And I'll say, no, and I'll like send you the quotes, and I send them the quotes. Like that really doesn't happen very often.
The main thing that people I get, well, in radio that you get is people go, oh, when will this go to air so I can listen to it?
Mm.
And the really, I don't know. It could be the next bulletin. It could be, you know, depending on the nature. As I said, stories like yours in those middle ground human interest area, they could be plopped in any bulletin, you know, where whoever's
there's a gap.
newsreading, you know, wants to put, oh, this would work well, or that's a different voice, or that'll flow nicely. So you just can't guarantee it. But you might be able to say sometimes, oh, look, we'll probably have something in the midday news if you've done an interview in the morning and you're, you know, working for the midday news, which is in a lot of places an extended bulletin, so a longer bulletin. But yeah, you're not.
But you don't send your scripts back.
No,
And neither do you,
just
Laura.
don't have time.
Don't have
Okay.
time,
It's just-
and I
Otherwise, it's just a PR exercise, and they've written
Yeah.
the story. In
Yeah.
which
they
case,
could come back.
I did
and
hear of a
fix certain
journalist once who
things,
sent a story back to a scientist, and he kindly rewrote the whole story, and nothing ever happened with that story.
Yeah.
I was writing a story on e-scooter fire things once, and yes, I found an expert in lithium batteries, and I spoke to him on the phone. I didn't understand anything that he said. So I had to send him the quotes and say, can you please check that this is actually science? And I think it was, but anyway.
Yeah. And I think that's fair. That's that. Look, I just want to make sure I get that right, which
Yeah.
often, as Felicity said, you might try and do when you're there, when you're talking to the person, or as Laura said. But yeah, in terms of an ongoing, let me stroke your head and make sure that you're happy with everything that I've done here.
Yeah. I had one of those recently. I think it was on Monday. There was an article out about a new oyster species had been discovered in tropical reefs, and I was talking to the researcher saying, oh, so it's a new species, and she was like, well, actually no, we just didn't know it was there, and we didn't know what it did. So it was about the way that was sold. I mean, we'd heard it, I think, from a radio interview, and then someone in my office said, that's a really cool story, and they had a lot of great video of the reefs and these little oysters and how they can repair the reefs and that kind of thing. But it wasn't about the discovery of the oyster, more about unlocking more of the secrets that the oyster could do and its benefits to the reef health. So it was just about making sure that we had that discovery and the newness part of that article correct.
Just making sure the language is correct. Like I'm always,
Yeah.
words really matter, and I'm really always
Yeah.
happy to talk to people about the nuances of words and make
So it sounds to me like you really do care about accuracy.
Shock horror.
And what I always say to communicators and scientists is say to the journalists that you're available on your mobile for them to call you to check something for accuracy. But don't ask for the story back, and make sure you've got the mobile on and that you're available. And I've had journalists send me stuff because they know that I won't change what they write. so that I can check with the scientists or because I know myself whether it's right or wrong. And so they do want to get it right. So it's about being cooperative. We're going to open it up to questions shortly. Or now. So if anyone has a question, either online or in the room, then let us know. But before we do that, I'm going to ask you all a question. But firstly, I'm going to ask you, Jo, how many do we have online? 30 online, okay, very good.
Theatre of the mind.
So I wanted in the room here, and people online can put it in the chat if that you like, hands up if you're a science communication practitioner. Okay, so you're people that help scientists with their work. Hand up if you're a science communication researcher. So you can put your hand up more than once, like I have. Okay. Hand up if you're a researcher interested in communicating about your science. Okay, excellent. Michelle, you told us you weren't. Hands up if you're something else altogether. Okay. Well, what are you? Sorry? How would you describe yourself?
So I communicate about finance for innovation.
Okay.
And
That's the type
I
of...
was half online, and then thanks to a cancelled soccer training, I'm here in person. So yeah, so I publicise
Welcome.
the science of innovative science, but how it gets financed and grown in Australia.
Okay. There was someone else down there, a couple of other people who were other people that were here. I'm very interested to find out who else is here. And I would urge you all to join the Australian Science Communicators. We're a very broad church. We include lots of different people.
Hello, my name is Michelle. I'm a volunteer communicator, science communicator with the Australian Citizen Science Association. I also volunteer with the Australian Science Communicators in my
I
day
think you're
job.
a science communicator.
I don't get paid for it. Let's put it that way.
Oh, well, I don't get paid for lots of things either, so that's okay.
I'm also a scout leader, which I do a lot of science and stuff with the scouts here in Southeast Queensland. I'm also a scientist in my day job. I work in forensics.
Welcome. It's good to have a mix of people. Yeah, you? The lady in the black dress?
I guess kind of. I'm a science and journalism student, so I'm kind of
fantastic.
doing both at once, but not. Yeah, I guess science communication at the moment, so it's interesting. Looking
Well,
at
I did
both.
science and journalism and combined them into science communication.
Well, yeah, that's kind
But
of.
I still do a bit of
direction it's
journalism
headed.
now and again.
Yeah, no, it's good.
All right, we have a question.
Another
Oh,
different person.
another different person.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Hayley, and I'm also a student, so I'm doing science and arts, and so mostly student now. I did volunteer briefly as a science communicator, but yeah, just a student now.
Welcome, very welcome.
Arts degrees.
Okay,
So I just have to
Jo.
keep up everyone.
Yeah, we have a question from online. So it's from Elvina. And they write that they recently had some interviews to talk about a recently published paper, and they prepared a Q&A question to send, like Q&A questions to send to the journalist prior to the interview. So kind of prompting the journalist with questions before the interview with an international and Australian focus. Is that something a journalist would find helpful or be offended by?
So was it like a, what is
Our research.
yeah, or like
Like
you'd-
suggested questions to ask the researcher.
I'd find that a bit funny.
Yeah.
know.
I think the
Yeah, I'm
information
Yeah, I'm
would
happy
be
to have the
helpful,
information.
but
Yeah.
expecting the journalist to ask those questions would be unfair. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, they can ask whatever they like to ask, but the information might help them understand the story and some background
Yeah.
information.
like if it was a Q&A, like what is this type of scientist? What do they research? What is this problem? With little answers, so kind of like dot points.
With the answers as
yeah,
well.
with
yeah.
the answers. That's
Yeah.
like, oh, okay, so
Like
you're
a
kind of
Q&A.
Yeah,
Yeah,
questions
so
and,
like-
and the answers. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
yeah. A prompt is not really needed, but if
Yeah.
you wanted to have as part of your media release a simplified sort of explanation, particularly if it's something very complex. And if you've sort of worked out how to simplify that, then that will help the journalist. But yeah, do it in a way that's not, you know, as I said, I'm very happy to say to you right now that I'm dumb, but I don't kind of want you treating me like that initially. Like, just give us, like, let's talk on the phone, and then I'll admit to you personally, like, look, I'm dumb, so help me out here. But, you know.
I think it's helpful, like if you get a media release and maybe the media person will give you a call and say like, oh, this research is great at talking about this, and these are some of the things they can talk about. That can.
You know, the question that I've seen scientists find the hardest to answer, it is, why are you doing this research? That's not a hard question, really. But they go, So, yeah, I mean, journalists will ask you the who, what, when, where, why, and how. And the most important of those is the why, not how you're doing the research.
The so what factor,
Yeah,
I suppose,
yeah.
for us to do the story is what is so what?
Why should we care?
What do you
Why
ask?
should I care?
What
Yeah.
are you trying to change behaviour? Are you trying to change policy? Are you trying to get money? Are you trying to save lives? Are you trying to get information? You know, why do an interview? Why talk about it? That's an important question to ask yourself and have an answer to, so you know what message you're getting out when you actually want to do media.
There's more questions online, but people in the room, if you want to ask questions, just put up your hand. So we'll take another one from online until people in the room feel comfortable to ask a question. Hard-hitting question.
Brandon asks, what advice would you give to someone starting out in science communication as a creative? And what direction do you see science communication going in?
I'm not sure these journalists could answer that somehow.
As a creative though?
As a creative person, it seems.
Yeah.
Like.
So there's someone doing science comms as part of like an arts degree or
maybe
in that sort of thing, or an
or they're
artist
doing
looking to-
creative forms of science communication.
Oh, that you can answer
like
that,
music
Natalie.
or
creative forms of science
drama.
Yeah. Look, I
You do theatre.
as technical knowledge, and this is not to take away from you, the technical knowledge that you bring is crucially important. But with the advent of AI or large language learning models, LLMs, what are they? It is going to be easier and easier for people to find this information, right? You can sort of throw some things into ChatGPT, do a little bit of work and kind of pull stuff out of it. Understanding, interpreting, evaluating, and like getting that across is, I think, there's a great potential for innovative and, you know, dynamic ways to communicate that stuff. You know, you see people, probably like a 2010s model is the YouTube channel. So you'd have a lot of people who start YouTube channels, and they're not necessarily researchers, but they're people who are really into something, and so they go and find stuff and then they present it in a digestible way. You know, you might have those kinds of things moving to TikTok now with short form content. They're going to continue finding ways to evolve. So there's going to be, I think, a lot of opportunities for creative people to kind of get into that, to marry science and creativity. As much as my partner hates the phrase STEAM, putting arts into STEM, he hates that. He co-writes plays with me, I should say. He's a creative person, but he's like, no, STEM is science, technology, engineering, math. But he is the kind of person who is very good at using skills of public speaking, of performance, of writing, to get those things across in other ways. So journalism is a really big part of what you're trying to get into, but it's not the only one. And I think there'll be lots of opportunities.
I think there's a lot of there is a movement in science communication towards more participatory science communication, which means that there is real opportunities for theatre, art, that whole multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah, they have the World Science Festival here every year, which was something I was involved in when it first started, when I was in government for a time, which scarred me, but that's fine. Not the World Science Festival, but like those kinds of things where you're getting comedians to do science panels with scientists and, you know, marrying those skills so you can kind of have a bit of both worlds and bites of the cherry. And I think there's a great play called Constellations, which is about physics and there's lots of, David Williamson wrote a play about Isaac Newton. So like there's ways to get across history of science, breakthroughs in science. You know, for me as someone who works in the arts as well, that's such a great potential. I should probably be doing that and trying to make money that way. Thanks for the input.
We've got a question down the back there, Michelle, and then there's another one over here.
Just as an aside, I'm the longest running volunteer for World Science Festival Brisbane. This is my 10th year.
Oh wow!
So yeah.
Congratulations.
So I do that as well on the side.
Yeah, it was only
Anyway,
supposed to be 3 years, so it's still going.
my question is, I also co-run the Great Southern BioBlitz, which is at the end of October this year.
Sorry, I missed that.
Great Southern BioBlitz.
BioBlitz.
BioBlitz. It's
Ooh.
where we ask people to go out and document the invasive species, the natural species, everything else around you for 4 days, from Friday till
great.
Monday. How much notice do you guys need for me to send you something to have a look at it, to be able to write something about that? Is that different for print media versus?
It probably depends what you want. If you're doing something because you obviously want to increase participation rates, I'm assuming, then I would think if you want people to sign up, you don't want to do it too far out, but not too close. You wouldn't want to do it the day before because people are like, that's too hard, I'm busy tomorrow. You probably want to do it a week before, maybe.
So at the moment, we're looking for people in areas, LGAs, to sign up as leaders in their area.
I see.
But it's not for another 5 months. So how much time do we need to give you guys to, hey, can you help us out with?
We do stories, on the day. That's most media are pretty reaction rate. We can move quickly when we need to. So if it was a good story and it wasn't a huge news day and we had room for it and we were interested and it was a good opportunity, we can do it that day. So you can alert the newsroom the day before.
If you can find a news angle earlier for it, like if it's like Queen's or Brisbane's biggest ever BioBlitz, and you're planning it now or you're going to launch it, you could do it now. You could do a launch now, and that would get people interested in it. But you got to find that angle that makes it different and new and exciting.
Is it for plants or animals?
Both.
All the things.
So it's kind of like when people do that bird, the bird survey that the
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay, sorry, forgive me. Oh, I see. Okay, so there's different. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, and it's tough because, as Laura said, if you go too far out, people will forget, and you run the risk of people going, "Oh, that sounds interesting," and then forgetting. So media is often about what can you see today or this weekend, or what is happening now or now-ish, which is why you do something like, say musicals over at QPAC will have a media call, say the day before, a few days before opening night. So the media go along and take photos and then kind of go, this is what's opening this weekend. And that's kind of different, obviously, field, but it's a similar thing. You sort of want to go, hey, this weekend you can go out and collect. But when you're putting out a call for people to lead, that's probably something you might want to go a bit more niche on, and target probably maybe specific media, because there are little specific media outlets that focus on, maybe environmental magazines, or maybe there's a
community news kind of
thing
would really
blogs, like hyper local, and then use your socials. Like that's probably the best bet, because if you're doing the actual thing, the media will probably go, look, can we come out, take pictures of you with the app and with people looking at stuff and taking photos, and you want to show what they'll be doing.
Yeah,
So,
I think we probably wouldn't do something 5 months out calling for people, but we'd do something maybe on the day in the blog saying this is starting. And then in terms of like a bigger piece, we'd probably want to know about that maybe the week before, if you had any research on the previous years and what had been found. And then if anyone has found something really weird, like in their yard, like strange, like, and then if we can go to their house and like where they found it and they've got photos of it, like that's probably what we'd want to do. And we'd want a little bit of lead time to do that, maybe like the week before, and then you could run that the day that it's starting.
I can see a benefit in a campaign too around what are the other benefits? Like, everyone knows we're all lonely. So is it like this campaign of, hey, you can go help the environment and meet a friend, or hey, we all need more exercise. This is a great, get your kilometers up this weekend, get your steps up this weekend and help the environment.
That's a great idea.
Like, there's and a week out, to get people to sign up, I can think of lots of really, fun ideas that could sell this as not just a straight kind of.
The running joke is that very violent don't actually go very far.
Go into your
But
back.
you're
A
hyper.
lot of exercise.
Yeah.
We've got a few more questions to go, so we might
Could I just make one suggestion to you? Radio programs might be a good one. So actually going to not the newsroom, but the programs, because they've got 3-hour shows to fill. So they're probably quite happy to turn over 10 minutes to a conversation with you about what the initiative is. And it's happening in 2 months' time, but you're looking for people to get recruited now, so they're ready to go. And then you can build that relationship with them. So when the event is happening, you can check back in and go, hey, we've got this is now happening. And then you can have that follow-up. So then you build that relationship. So radio programs, now that I think of it, is a good one.
Associate Professor Michelle Redlinger, thank you very much for this room.
Sorry, she's not associate professor, she's just Miss.
She looks too young. Michelle organised this room, so give her a big clap.
Thank you.
But Michelle has a question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, when you've done a story, do you hear back? Do you get feedback from the scientists that you've interviewed, or and what is the feedback like?
Often I hear back from the scientists. Actually, I don't always hear back from people after a story, but often if I've spoken to a researcher, they'll say that was a great story, and they always want to know when it's run so that they can put that in their portfolio thing. So.
Well, hopefully it's getting more interest, the media. You got one online and then one down the back. Yeah.
Thanks. I've got 2, but I'll ask one and then one after the next person in the room. So Julia asked, what recommendations do you have for comms folk to continue to grow their skills in this area? Groups to join or courses to take, etc.
Oh, I don't know. I'd say digest as much news as you can, which sounds simple, but there's so many different ways to get information these days. There's so many websites, and like you were talking about, there's all these different community radio stations and newspapers and things like that. So you might get an idea that comes across your lap, or a potential story, and you go, how do I sell this, or who do I sell this to? And there might be a media outlet that just fits like a glove for that particular story. And understanding then how the media work in different ways. What possibly would work really well for a TV medium might not work for a newspaper, for instance. So
I think there's an opportunity for Ask, perhaps, to do 2 things. One is to set perhaps a mentoring program up where people experienced with dealing the media could mentor those less experienced, and potentially have more training sessions like this or more awareness sessions like this.
Do you, as science communicators, or maybe through the university, I'm not sure, but have access to, I've known that it exists for a long time, iSentia, which used to be called Media Monitors. So just in my new role, having gone to the dark side, as they say, I'm now checking and using iSentia daily for media mentions and that sort of thing. And I'm learning heaps from that. Like, I'm discovering radio stations and various things that I never knew existed, and very niche publications. That's why I mentioned niche publications, because in the health realm, it turns out there's huge amounts of, websites that focus on health and doctors and hospitals and things like that I didn't know existed. So I'm learning about that. So if you have access to those iSentia, you might be able to get onto that and just do some keyword searches and look for, all what science, science story, health, or whatever things that are in your realm of interest or of work, and see what else is kind of out there.
Yeah, so the universities do have this daily digest where we get to see what's going on at the university, which is quite cool. And I also subscribe to the Australian Science Media Centre's email, so I can see what has made the news in the past week, and I find that really fascinating as well.
I think there was a couple more in the room.
Yeah.
So we might take them and then take 1 or 2 final ones from online.
Okay, so you said hard-hitting questions. With the rise of especially short-form social media and low attention span type stuff, how much do people even care about being informed anymore versus just being entertained? And how does that change what you do?
Rant incoming.
Go off.
People
Yes,
like to be
I'm just crying.
a lot of people just really like to be right in their own opinions, and everyone's entitled to their own opinions, and people will have different life experiences that bring them to certain points. And I absolutely fundamentally understand that some things will never be black or white, you know. Entertainment is part of, like, if people aren't being entertained, and I'm not talking about, I'm entertained, I'm talking about if people aren't engaged, then news doesn't exist at all. It's the fact that people are inherently interested in the world around them that made people start to realize, oh, if we sell them that in, you know, easily digestible chunks, then we can potentially make money off it, particularly when advertising. And that's why everything, you know what, I should shut up and let them talk. But
I think one key point is
people always want to be engaged. Some people want to be right. The internet makes them louder than they necessarily should be. So you just have to kind of try to focus on the ones who you are reaching.
I think one thing to think about is who you want to communicate with about that particular story or research, because as Natalie said, there's lots of niches out there, and the public aren't just the public. Different people watch Channel 7 News to watch Channel ABC or SBS News. They're different demographics. So who do you want to reach for what purpose? And think about what they consume, and then you'll get to them. And the same is true of social media. Different young people are looking at different channels. What channels are they looking at? Which young people do you want to get to?
I think there's so much misinformation out there, though, and like the role of the media in being a trusted voice, as you were saying before, is more important than ever. So I think if people subscribe, I know I've got a vested interest in this, but if people subscribe and they watch the news and support quality journalism, then we'll be going on the right track.
Do you have information on how far down an article people read, and is that getting shorter?
Yeah, we do. Yeah. People don't want to read most of the time, like a 3,000 word story. That's why we keep most of our stories to under 500 words. But it's not something that I'm constantly looking at.
Which is why the media write in that inverted pyramid style, which is the most important stuff up the top. So if you take up the top and it makes sense by itself, that's probably all you're going to get across.
I don't ever want to seem like a hypocrite. I'm terrible at consuming longer form stuff. Couldn't tell you the last time I watched Four Corners. Like I go to do it, and I'm like, oh, I just am tired, and so
just want to watch.
It's hard.
There's just a time. There's a time and a place for it. If it's a Sunday, you've got a limited time. You want to get into this really nice feature story.
I still watch Media Watch. It's 15 minutes. Sure, I can do that. But like everyone is grappling with these challenges of how do you keep people? How do you get? There's so many more demands on people.
There's so many different channels,
and there's so many more options. You know, and I guess it's about trying to engage people in the world around us and remind us that we're not living in an island. We can't silo ourselves. I think the recent elections in Canada and Australia, I think, show a great deal that people still care about the world around themselves and see the influence of something like America and go, actually, we're, you know, taking that on and going, we don't necessarily know. This is not me being political at all. This is just worldwide trends. They are there. People are in tune with them. So people are still out there consuming stuff, and you've got to try and.
And I would say in my business, I mean, the news is on from 6 till 7, and you have to kind of consume it in that hour. But our app audience is growing hugely. Yeah. So people are if they're like, oh, I've missed the start of the news, they might wait till the end and then watch it on the app. And then they can also fast forward through the bits that I'm not interested in that story or whatever. So it also means that they can watch it anywhere on their phone, on their bus ride home if they don't get home by 6 o'clock. So the way that we consume news is definitely changing, but we're also trying to meet some of those needs.
And you see Channel 7 stories on Facebook when it's relevant to
and we resell
algorithm is.
When you talk about entertainment and information, we're trying to make that information dissemination more interesting in certain respects. And in terms of, I mean, one of our poor interns got sent out with a sandwich board on him for the election, and he was out interviewing people, which was hilarious. Wasn't on the TV news, but it did really well on our socials. So we're still trying to find ways to give people information and entertain them. There's a place for both, isn't there? You wouldn't do that with a world tragedy, but
and it's hard because people are love to jump to the media crap, and they're all biased and they've all got agendas and and it's like, well, yeah, a lot of them are companies that have to pay people and they have to make revenue but ultimately people who become journalists as you said earlier, really do care about putting the best version of the truth as they can find it to their audience.
That's what gives me faith in the media still, even the Australian. A question from the back.
Yeah, just quickly, coming from like a science journalism student who wants to land somewhere in the process between the two, how does a story get from like inside a scientist lab to in your inbox? Like what's involved, who's involved, how does that happen?
That's probably the hardest part, I reckon, because I think every scientist in Australia probably has a good story to tell.
Most scientists don't know they have a good story.
Yeah.
That's where science communicators come in, I really think, because we're the ones who linger in the corridors or over tea or a glass of wine, and we hear them talking about things and we go, that's a good story, not the one you sent me.
Yeah.
And so we find those stories and then we help the scientists to get them out to the media.
That's usually
To me,
media
that is a big
communicator
role
in
for
the middle.
science communicators.
Yeah. And they're reluctant to do so often too, aren't they? You have to coax it out of them because they're humble and they aren't sure what is. And there's so much good work going on around this country. We have no idea.
There is so much potential.
Yeah. So it's and that's where, as you say, your job is to get it to the point where you can present it to the media and then try and follow on. So you're the
if you want to be a science journalist,
thank you.
You need to
I know words.
You need to find it and dig it down. Unfortunately, we've got to go to Joe for the last question online, and then Joe's going to wrap it up.
Last question is from Angela, and they ask, how do you get your story to stand out and make a connection? How to get past the information overload, connect with people, and motivate them to act, e.g., reef protection and climate change. So
that's a nice, easy one. I can sum that up in one sentence. No, I don't. Look, it's always going to be a crapshoot. And what I would say is if you don't have any luck on your first go, retool, recheck, try again, try different media outlets, try different forms. It's not a one and done kind of game. If you don't get any media interest the first time you dangle the bait, maybe there's a cyclone happening. Take a look at the conditions of the world around. If you were planning on sending out a media release and then there's a giant mass shooting in the middle of the Queen Street Mall, hold back. That's touch wood. So have a look at the time that you're planning to send it out. Can you tie it to something that is relevant that people will already be thinking about? So if there's like Reef Awareness Week or a big a report into coral bleaching or something that's come out, can you tie your research to that so it's already topical? If it doesn't work, rejig, try another angle, and try again. Like don't give up.
I think if you can address an email personally to a journalist as well and try and build relationships with those journalists, because I know if I've dealt with a media person before and now they're at the university and they give me a call, I'm definitely going to give them time of day because I know them, they've got a good story, chat it out, explain it to me, tell me why I should care. That's always helpful. And definitely try again. I get so many emails.
And don't, because the amount of times I've deleted things that I'm like, oh shit, I hope they email me back. Hope they send it again. And that's the weird line you have to cross. Like you don't want to bully journalists.
Don't send it like 5 times over 2 days, because then I'll just start
delete it out.
I'll start deleting it. I saw it the first time, and I see it again.
We can be petty, messy people, and if we feel like we're being harassed, but if you're just like, hey, got a great story, is this something that you're interested in right now, or this person's in town, or this, as Felicity says, like developing those relationships is really, really useful.
It can be a bit of luck. We did lose a lot of really good stories during Cyclone Alfred, and that's pretty unlucky. But if you've got a story that works, you can hang on to it. There's no reason you can't try again in a couple of weeks or a couple of months or something. And maybe it's in the way that it was sold. I mean, unfortunately, it's like doing a pitch, and it could be a little bit like facing rejection, but give it a try. And if it hasn't landed with anyone, try again, find another way to sell it. It comes back to that so what I was talking about earlier. I think what really has an impact on people that might help get it over the line.
In a world of misinformation and disinformation, I think journalists like this are so, so important. Please join with me in thanking Natalie, Felicity and Laura.
And I will thank Jenny for presenting this amazing panel. So thank you so much to our speakers tonight and to our audience. Everyone is still here. It's been a fascinating discussion. I loved every minute of it. Thank you so much. And our online participants really were very engaged. Some of them have had to go more recently, but that's a long time to be online to listen. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining tonight. And Australian Science Communicators, we will be having more get-togethers online and in person for the rest of the year. Stay tuned for our new website launching very soon. Thank you. And we are now, okay, so that all the online people, thank you for joining. You can go. Everyone else.
Farewell, online people.
Everyone else, we are going to adjourn to the student bar for a nice chat and gathering, and everyone is most welcome to join us. So it's only like 3 minutes walk. It's not too far. So hopefully you can join, but otherwise come